It was the sound of laughter that cut me deeper than any knife. Not just any laughter, it was his. My grandson, Tyler, leaning back in his chair, mocking the way my hands shook as I tried to lift my coffee mug. "Look at Grandpa," he sneered, loud enough for the whole table to hear. "Can't even hold a cup without spilling it." The others chuckled nervously, pretending it was harmless. But I saw the satisfaction in his eyes. That boy, no, that man, because he was 22 now, knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted me small, weak, forgotten. I set the mug down slowly, carefully, and wiped the little splash of coffee from my thumb. My daughter shifted in her seat, embarrassed but silent. My son-in-law cleared his throat but didn't defend me. Tyler ruled that table like a spoiled king, and they all let him. I didn't say a word, but inside me, something old and heavy began to stir. I had raised my family on discipline and respect, values earned with sweat and sacrifice. To see them crumble, to hear my own blood laugh at me, that was a wound that couldn't heal. Later that night, when the house had gone quiet, I sat alone in the guest room. My suitcase lay half open on the floor, clothes spilling out like a defeated man's belongings. But I wasn't defeated. Not yet. The moonlight through the curtains caught the edge of the photograph I always kept in my wallet. A younger me, holding Tyler on the day he was born. His tiny fists curled around my finger, his eyes searching for something he trusted me to provide. What happened to that boy? What happened to the bond we once had? I traced the photo with my thumb and felt the anger twist into something sharper. Revenge is not a word I ever thought I'd use against my own flesh and blood, but that night, it became a promise. The plan started forming as I sat there, listening to the creaks of the old house, the snores from down the hall, and the faint sound of Tyler's phone buzzing with messages from his so-called friends. They didn't know the truth about him. None of them did. But I did. I had seen things, heard things. And if Tyler wanted to humiliate me, I'd show him what humiliation really meant. I leaned back in the chair, the springs groaning under my weight, and let the idea settle into place. A month. That was all it would take. By the end of it, Tyler would never laugh at me again. And as I closed my eyes, I whispered to myself, "You wanted to see me weak, boy. Now you'll see me strong in the one way that matters." The next morning, I rose earlier than anyone else in that house. Old men don't need alarms. Our bones wake us before dawn. I made myself a quiet breakfast, black coffee and toast, and I thought about Tyler. I thought about the way his laughter still echoed in my ears. Revenge, I realized, didn't need fists or shouting. No, revenge worked best when it was quiet, calculated, and irreversible. I started by watching him. Whenever he left his phone lying around, I noted what I could. He was careless, too sure of himself. Passwords scribbled on scraps of paper, left in plain sight. I caught sight of one on the kitchen counter, 6 numbers written next to a bank logo. He had no idea I noticed. That afternoon, while my daughter dragged Tyler off to run errands, I sat at the family computer. The old thing wheezed as it started, but soon enough I had what I needed. His social media profiles, his online businesses, gambling apps, sports betting accounts, and something that looked an awful lot like crypto trading. I shook my head slowly. The boy who mocked my trembling hands had debts up to his neck. I printed a few of the records, slipped them neatly into my suitcase. Paper-proof. I didn't need much, just enough to break the shiny shell he wore in front of the family. By evening, I joined them for dinner, quiet as ever. Tyler leaned back, scrolling his phone, smirking now and then at something private. I let him enjoy it. I let him believe he still held the upper hand. "Grandpa," he said suddenly, not looking up, "you ever think about a nursing home? Might be easier for everyone." The table went still. My daughter frowned. My son-in-law shifted uncomfortably. I met Tyler's eyes. I didn't flinch. "You might be right, boy. But if I go, I'll be sure to leave the family something to remember me by." He grinned, thinking he'd won again. But I saw the first flicker of uncertainty there. He didn't know yet what I meant. He would. That night, in the silence of my room, I laid out the papers across the bed like a general planning a campaign. I wasn't just going to answer his insult. I was going to dismantle him, piece by piece. The first move would come in 3 days. On Sunday, the whole family was due to gather for a big dinner. Tyler thought it was to celebrate his new job, but for me, it would be the stage for his fall. And as I folded the papers back into my case, I felt no guilt, only a strange calm. The kind that comes when a man finally knows exactly what he has to do. Sunday arrived like any other Sunday in a house that had learned to pretend everything was ordinary. The curtains were drawn against the weak autumn sun. The kettle hissed while my daughter fussed at the stove, and Tyler padded about in his sneakers, loud enough to announce his presence without actually arriving. He loved noise. He loved being noticed. I moved slow that morning, the way old men do when every joint remembers a different year. I dressed in the jacket I kept for company. Not the suit I'd saved for weddings and funerals, the softer one that still smelled faintly of my wife's lavender from years ago. Small comforts matter. They steady you. I took my time placing a newspaper on my lap and folded the corner just so. Little rituals hide a lot. They began to filter in. My daughter with her practiced apologies already on her lips. Her husband with jokes too loud to be sincere. Tyler last, bursting through the door with that grin that said he had the world on loan. He hugged his mother like he hadn't a care, then dropped onto the sofa as if the cushions owed him interest. He tossed his phone on the coffee table with theatrical carelessness, the same phone I'd been watching for days. The house buzzed with plate clatter and small talk. Someone put on the radio low, something about football scores and weather, the background noise families used to hide uncomfortable things. I kept my voice small. The smaller the voice, the more people lean in without noticing the trap. We ate. We made the usual small talk that circles round and round until it lands on safe topics. Then Tyler began. The same shade of casual cruelty as always. You still using that old cane, Grandpa? Thought you'd go full antique by now, he said, laughing. Others smiled obligingly. My daughter shot him that look, the one that wished he would stop, but she didn't tell him to. I looked down at my hands, rough and spotted with time, and I said nothing. Silence is a lever if you know how to tilt it. After dessert, when coffee was poured and pockets had been checked for crumbs, I told them I'd like to talk for a moment. People expect old men to ramble, to wax nostalgic. It lowers the guard. I used their assumptions like a key. I cleared my throat. I found some things, I said. About Tyler. Heads turned the way sunflowers turned to a bright sky. Tyler smirked because even now he thought this was a joke. He thought his father would make a quip, his mother would smile, and the room would go back to comedy. I walked to the coffee table and picked up his phone. He hadn't thought to keep it with him, and set it on the table like a judge placing evidence. The movement was quiet, precise. The laughter from earlier sputtered into an awkward hum. How long have you been hiding the app, son? I asked, and for a moment the house hung between two breaths. What app? He said, playing innocence the way others play cards. He's good at that. He's practiced. You don't have to act surprised. I tapped the phone screen, brought up the betting app. The balance alone made his smirk twist. This one, your transfers, your losses, your, what do you call them, investments. Tyler's face changed then. Not the instant color drain of guilt. He's too much of a practiced actor for that. But a tightening around the mouth, the small shrug that says, you caught me, but I'll charm my way out. He tried to grin. It didn't reach his eyes. Grandpa, that's private banking stuff, he scoffed. You wouldn't understand. I smiled, the kind of smile that is not friendly. I understand arithmetic, son. I worked with numbers before you were out of diapers. You transfer money here, a little there. You slide your losses into one account and your wins into another, and you pray nobody notices. Pray all you like. Sometimes prayers come answered. I placed a printed bank statement on the table, the same one I'd taken the time to compile, and pushed it toward him. There was a rustle like a paper storm. He reached for it, as if to hide it, as if movement could erase evidence. My daughter grabbed it first, scanning the numbers. Her face went white. Not shock, not sorrow, the sick white of someone who recognizes contingency plans crumbling. Tyler, she whispered. What is this, Dad? His father said, the edge in his voice finally dropping. Is this necessary? Necessary. That word is the hinge of many family doors. Everything I did that day was necessary. Revenge has a meaning only after you give it one. I spoke slow. You borrowed money from people you can't pay back. You used my name, my good name, to borrow more. And worst of all, you sold that collection of watches your grandmother left me. The room went still enough to hear the grandfather clock in the hall count its ticks. He laughed once, a short, brittle sound. Nah, I sold some things, he lied. It's none of your business. It is my business, I said. Because your name is on things I signed for you when you were a child. Because you used my garage as collateral. Because you thought I'd catch the fall. He tried to smart off, to make the room laugh with him, but the laughter wouldn't come. My daughter turned to him, eyes brimming with a mix of anger and fear. You promised you'd stop. We talked about it. It's fine, Mom. He said it like a bargain, like he could cancel consequences. I stood and walked to the window, looking at the street where leaves drifted like small, slow accusations. When I turned back, I watched their faces. I watched him sweat those small, pathetic beads he'd gotten away with hiding from everyone but me. Do you remember when you were 6? I said, and the memory landed heavier than any ledger. You put a frog in your sister's ballet shoes because you thought it would be funny. You learned then that pranks have a cost. She had to go barefoot to the recital. You were punished. You cried and I made you apologize. I let that image sit in the air like an accusation. He flinched. We all remember the way someone's small cruelty has the footprint of what they may become. Today, I said, I called the landlord for that garage you use. I called the bank where you keep your little shells of investments. I called the collector who bought the watches. Turns out he wants provenance. He asked me if I'd be willing to sign something confirming the sale. I did, for a fee. I let them process it, let fear fill the spaces his arrogance had. Tyler's voice came out thin. What fee? Whatever it takes, I said. I'm not about to let you live on my reputation and pretend you're above consequences. He stood abruptly, hands clenching. You can't do that. You're my grandfather. Meaning? I asked. You can't ruin me. Not in front of everyone. I could have, in that moment, swung the gavel simply and ended him. Exposed every transaction, every lie. But the slow burn is sweeter. Instead, I unrolled another paper, an email thread between 2 of his creditors discussing repossession dates. They called me suspicious when you couldn't be reached, I said. They asked if they could contact a family member. I told them I'd be around. His face finally broke. Anger and panic wrestled into a human shape. You're psychotic, he spat. Maybe I am. Or maybe I've finally learned the exact temperature needed to make a man uncomfortable enough to change. Revenge done correctly isn't about blood. It's about breaking the illusion that you are invincible. We argued then, the kind of words that tear at fabric and sometimes at futures. He swore, my daughter wept in a corner, his father tried to call me a bully, and Tyler threatened to leave, to sell what he could, to sue. Threats are hollow things until someone else makes them heavy. I let him rail, then I sat down, folded my hands, and produced one final card, a notarized letter I'd had drawn up that morning, amending the little trust I'd set for the children when they were born. It transferred a conditional clause. Any beneficiary who was proven to be using funds to endanger the family's financial stability would have distributions suspended and a guardian appointed to manage their assets. Simple legal language. Hard consequences. He reached for the letter like flame. You can't do that. You can't change a trust unilaterally. I folded my fingers. I can. And I did. It's filed with my lawyer. If you want to save yourself, you'll start by calling the people you owe and make a plan. You'll stop pretending. You'll ask for help. Or you'll watch your life unwind in the light of day. Tyler looked at me like I'd betrayed him. Maybe I had. But the old promise in my chest, that no one will turn my love into an ATM and my name into a shield for their recklessness, was louder. He stormed out then, slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. The slam echoed like a verdict. The room felt cold and smaller without him. My daughter sat down, burying her face in her hands. Her husband muttered something about lawyers and family and expectations. I remained seated, calm as a lake after a storm. The work had started, a tide had turned. But as the sun shifted in the window and shadows reached like fingers across the floor, I felt that particular, expectant ache. The one that whispers that the real test is not the first strike, but the counter-strike you will not see coming. Outside, a car engine idled for a long time, then peeled away. Inside, the clock ticked. And I realized, with a cold clarity, that Tyler's proudest armor had been his arrogance. Strip that away, and what remains must finally stand on its own. I tucked the papers back into my jacket pocket, the folds warm from my hand. And as I looked at my daughter's trembling shoulders, I understood something simple and terrible. Sometimes the person you have to save is the one you love, and sometimes the only language they'll listen to is the one that hurts. The afternoon quieted. The house exhaled. And from the street beyond, a familiar ringtone cut through the stillness. Tyler's phone, left behind on the porch. I stood and walked to it. When I picked it up, a new message lit the screen. 3 words, all in capital letters. I read them twice before my hands stopped being steady. I'll be back tonight. The message burned in my palm. I'll be back tonight. Short words, but they carried the weight of a storm. I set his phone down on the hallway table and listened to the silence of the house. My daughter and her husband had gone upstairs, their voices muffled behind a closed door, arguing about what had just happened. They still thought this was about money. They didn't understand, not yet, that Tyler and I had crossed into a different kind of war. I sat in the old chair by the window and waited. The streetlight outside cast a weak yellow glow over the quiet neighborhood. Families in the other houses were winding down for the night, kids brushing their teeth, televisions murmuring from living rooms. Normal life. But in my house, a reckoning was building. At midnight, I heard the engine. Low, steady, creeping closer. Headlights cut across the blinds before going dark. The front door rattled once, then a key turned in the lock. My grandson stepped inside, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning the room like a burglar. "You went too far, old man," he hissed when he saw me. I didn't rise. "Sit down, Tyler." He didn't sit. He paced, hands twitching, jaw tight. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. You ruined everything. Do you even know what kind of people I owe? They'll come after me if I can't pay. They'll come after all of us." "Then you shouldn't have borrowed money you couldn't return," I said evenly. "You used my name, my shop, even your mother's trust. You dragged us all into your mess. That ends tonight." His laugh was sharp, desperate. "You think you're in control? You're just a bitter old man. I could take everything from you if I wanted. Everything." I leaned forward slowly, letting him see the steadiness in my eyes. "You already tried. Now it's my turn." His bravado slipped for a second, just a second, but I caught it. That flicker of fear, the crack in his mask. It was enough. I reached into my jacket and placed a thick envelope on the table. He froze. "What's that?" "Proof," I said. "Bank statements, gambling records, texts with your creditors. I sent copies to your father, to the bank, and to the police station. If anything happens to me, Tyler, if I so much as fall down the stairs, that envelope ensures your life as you know it is over." His face went pale. "You wouldn't." "I already did," I said. For the first time in weeks, I saw silence in him. Not the smug kind, but the heavy kind, the kind that means a man knows the walls are closing in. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting between me and the envelope, searching for a way out. But there wasn't one. "You have a choice," I continued. "Face your debts like a man, or keep running until they eat you alive. Either way, Tyler, you'll never mock me again." The clock in the hall struck 1. Its chime rolled through the house like a verdict. Tyler stood there, fists trembling at his sides, his mouth opening and closing without words. Then he turned and walked out, slamming the door behind him. I stayed in the chair, listening to his footsteps fade into the night. For the first time in a long while, I felt steady. Not happy, not relieved, steady. Revenge doesn't always end with shouting or blood. Sometimes it ends with silence, with a man walking away because he knows he's been beaten. But as I stared at that envelope, I knew this wasn't finished. Not yet. Because a man like Tyler doesn't leave quietly. The house held its breath after he left. The clock ticked, the refrigerator hummed, the wind pressed against the windows. But beneath it all was that deeper silence, the kind that only comes before a storm. I stayed in the chair until dawn, the envelope still on the table in front of me like a weapon I couldn't sheath. When the sun finally crawled up over the rooftops, I brewed a pot of coffee and sat in the kitchen, staring at the steam. My daughter came down, her face gray from a sleepless night. She didn't ask where Tyler had gone, and I didn't tell her. Sometimes the truth is too heavy for people who don't want to carry it. By mid-morning, the first call started. Unknown numbers, voices that spoke in half-snarls and unfinished threats. Men asking for Tyler, men who said they had business with him, men who knew my address because he had given it to them. I hung up on each one, my chest tightening, my jaw locking harder with every call. He hadn't just drowned himself in debt. He had dragged his family into it like an anchor. That night, just as I was locking the back door, I heard it. Glass shattering in the garage. A shadow moved behind the small window. My hand tightened on the doorknob. For a moment, I thought it was Tyler, but the voices that followed weren't his. 2 men. Heavy boots. Searching. I slipped into the hallway and pulled open the drawer by the stairs. Inside, wrapped in an old towel, was the revolver I hadn't touched in years. My wife used to beg me to get rid of it after I retired. Guns invite trouble, she said. Maybe she was right. But tonight, trouble had already come. The garage door creaked open. Footsteps entered the house. Tyler? One of them called, his voice mocking. Your grandpa around? We need to have a chat. I stepped into the living room, the revolver hidden at my side. You're looking for him? I said. The men froze. One tall, with tattoos creeping up his neck. The other shorter, stockier, eyes scanning every corner of the room. Yeah, the tall one said finally. Where's the boy? Not here. My voice didn't shake. And if you're smart, you'll leave before you end up regretting this visit. The stocky one laughed. Old man's got guts. Maybe we should sit and talk. Tyler owes money. Big money. If he can't pay, someone else will. I lifted the revolver just enough for the light to catch the metal. I've paid more than my share already. And I won't pay again. The tall one's grin faltered. The shorter one shifted, uneasy. For a moment, none of us moved. 3 statues in a room thick with tension. Then, without another word, they backed toward the door, muttering curses under their breath. The lock clicked behind them. My hands trembled only after they were gone. Later, when the house was quiet again, I sat at the kitchen table, the revolver beside me, and thought about Tyler. This wasn't over. He had sent wolves to my door, and now he would learn the price of that betrayal. I picked up his phone again, scrolled through his contacts, and found the number of the man who had just threatened me. I pressed call. When the voice answered, I spoke 6 words that sealed my grandson's fate. You'll find Tyler at my shop. When I made that call, the one that told them where to find Tyler, I felt a weight in my chest like a drawer sliding home. It wasn't pleasure, not really. It was the same hard, steady thing that had pushed me through long nights on cold roofs and through hospital waiting rooms. I'd never wanted to be anyone's executioner. I wanted only one thing, to stop being a convenience for his recklessness. They came back 2 nights later, but not in the way I expected. Not with boots and threats, but in suits and with badges. 2 men in plain clothes, polite and precise, showed me a warrant and a patience that had been sharpened by too many similar calls. We received a complaint of fraud and extortion tied to your grandson, one said. We have reason to believe some accounts were opened in your name and that threats were used to collect. I told them everything I had, the receipts, the statements, the texts, the way he'd signed my name on papers he had no right to use. I handed over the envelope, the one that had sat on my table like a promise. It felt strange, watching my own handwriting and the small notations I'd made be read by someone else. My hands did not shake. I'd come to expect this steadiness of mine. It has a price, but it also keeps you alive. They left with the papers and another with a gentle, professional request. If you're willing, we'd like to speak to him. The words found a nerve in me. I had baited a line. Now I had to decide whether to reel him in or let the current run. When they knocked on his door 2 hours later, it was my daughter who opened it. Tyler was there, pale, not with the swagger of the boy who'd mocked me at the table, but with the fragility of a man discovering his house of cards. I heard raised voices, the metallic click of a door, and then the hollow clack of 3 sets of shoes on the porch. The officers led him past my daughter's shoulders and into the night. People like to imagine those moments as loud, shouting, accusations, dramatic turns. What I remember is a thin, terrible quiet. Tyler's head bowed when he passed me on his way to the squad car. For a second, I thought I saw that small baby again, the one whose tiny fist had closed around my finger the day he was born. Then the car door swung, and they were gone. In the days that followed, the house lived in that liminal state between before and after. My daughter cried in the kitchen and then washed up without talking about anything real. The neighbors kept glances brief and careful. The men who had once called me with coarse threats stopped their calls entirely. There was a hollow victory in that last part. The wolves had been sent away, but the boy had been left with the consequences he'd built. He was charged with a string of offenses: fraud, identity theft, coercion. The paperwork was a blunt thing, squares of text that could not carry the nuance of love or disappointment. I visited the courthouse once, the way you might visit a place where you used to dance. I watched him sit in a chair that was too small for a man and too big for a child, and I watched the man he had been reduced to when the props were stripped away. At his arraignment, his lawyer paced like a caged animal. My daughter sat with her face in her hands and once looked up, eyes empty and pleading, as if asking what part belonged to her and what part belonged to me. I wanted to tell her that not every wrong can be fixed by apologies. I wanted to tell her that I had ached for mercy for all of them, and that sometimes mercy and safety pull in opposite directions. In the quiet that followed, I signed the trust amendments I had filed, the ones that would protect what little stability remained from being used as collateral again. I supplied a list of conditions and professionals who would evaluate any beneficiary who seemed determined to sabotage themselves with other people's money. It felt small, a bureaucratic bandage on an emotional wound, but it was a boundary that could not be pushed aside as easily as a scolding at the dinner table. People asked me why I had gone so far. They asked why I didn't just pay the debts and go on living like nothing had happened. They said revenge breeds only more pain. They were right in a way that cut like glass. Revenge did breed pain, but it also taught a few hard lessons. Tyler could have learned them cheaper and softer if he'd let them land on him earlier. He didn't. In a jail cell, he found something that money and bravado had never given him: silence long enough to think. He called maybe 3 times. Once I answered, and he sobbed like a child. The next time I let it go to voicemail. The third call I picked up, and he spoke in a voice I recognized as the one he used with me when he was sick and small. "Grandpa," he said, "I'm sorry. I'm so damn sorry." There was no grand speech, no promises of immediate transformation. Just a man's confession that he'd been a coward who'd used other people's lives as cushions for his falls. I told him, in the simplest terms, what he needed to do: accept responsibility, make amends where possible, go through the programs the court set out, and stop using other people for his conveniences. I told him I would help where I could, not financially, but by supporting him to get the help he needed. His silence on the line lasted long enough to be a prayer. When he spoke again, it was a plan, small and scrappy. It was the best thing I'd heard from him in years. When the court handed down a sentence: community service, restitution where it could be managed, mandatory counseling, and supervised release, it was both less and more than I'd expected. He would not be swept away entirely, nor would his victims be left wholly bereft. The legal system did what courts do: parcel the mess into something legible. What it could not do was stitch our family back together. Months passed. Tyler showed up for counseling with the kind of half-hearted arrogance that masks fear. Then slowly, with fitful progress, that arrogance began to erode. He worked the hours the court demanded. He sat through group sessions and sometimes spoke. He came to the garage and helped, not because I asked, but because his parole officer required documentation of employment, and because maybe he needed the work as an anchor. We did not reconcile magically. A single moment of eye contact does not undo 22 years of being let down. But there were small things: a text at noon on a Tuesday, "Got coffee?" That turned into coffee at 3, which turned into an hour of working side by side in the shop while the radios hummed. The first time he took a call from a creditor and said, plainly, "I'll set up a plan," my chest felt as if it had been unhooked from a vice. Revenge had not been the end. It had been the instrument that made the end inevitable. And in that inevitability, something else emerged: an opportunity for accountability. Perhaps that seems like a tidy moral. It isn't. Damage had been done. Trust had been shredded. There were scars that would not disappear. But there was also movement. Progress that would have been impossible if I had stayed small and silent. Sometimes, late at night, I sit in the chair by the window and watch the light move across the lawn. My hands still know the weight of the revolver I kept, though it is put away now. I still hear the echo of his laughter at that first dinner, but I also hear the softer things: his voice when he learns to fix an engine part without swearing, the way he helps a neighbor mend a fence, the night he came home early and sat on the porch and actually listened to my story about his father teaching me to fish. I don't tell people this, that a part of me is relieved. There is shame in that relief. I know it. But grief and relief can live in the same room if you let them. I also know this: revenge is not a cure. It is a hammer that breaks what needs breaking. What you do afterward determines whether you've created a ruin or a foundation. Tyler will have to live with what he did. So will I. And my daughter. She will have to forgive in the way she needs to forgive, if she ever chooses to forgive at all. Families are messy collections of debts and gifts, of care and harm. I broke his armor because he used it to hurt us. I would do it again if the choice were between allowing him to continue destroying lives and forcing him into a place where he could, perhaps, learn to build something better. On a late afternoon last spring, Tyler stood in the doorway to the garage and watched me patch a dent I'd been meaning to mend for years. He didn't speak at first. Then he said, "I don't know how to be the man I should have been." No bravado, no excuses, just the ache of someone looking honestly at himself. I put down the hammer and handed him the cloth. "Neither do I said. "But we can try, and trying is the work." He started to laugh, a short, unbelieving sound, and for once it wasn't cruel. It was a sound that meant we might be strangers who could keep company without disguises. It wasn't vengeance then, it was the slow, blunt business of repair. I don't know if it's a happy ending. I don't think life ever gives us those neat bows. What I know is this: the table will never be the same. He will never again be permitted to turn my name into collateral for his mistakes. And someday, maybe, when the bills are paid and the counseling notes read honest, there will be a different kind of dinner, quieter, more careful, scarred but real. I signed the last page of the trust amendment with a hand that has lived through more winters than summers. It hurt, and it steadied me. Outside, the sun fell low and painted the garage door in gold. Tyler was at the bench, elbow deep in an engine, and he looked up when I waved. He nodded, awkward and earnest. I nodded back. Revenge had been my voice when I felt invisible. But speaking up was only the first thing. What comes after is the slow, sometimes ugly work of living with the consequences, and of choosing, every day, whether to keep hammering or start fixing.